The morning Priscilla Ashford realized her marriage was over, she had been talking about the clouds shaped like horses when her husband threw his coffee cup against the wall. She stood in their small kitchen in Jefferson, Texas, flour dusting her apron from the biscuits she had been making since dawn, and watched the dark liquid drip down the faded wallpaper. It was August 1883, and the heat had already turned their home into an oven despite the early hour. Thomas had been staring at her with that look for months now, the one that made her feel like she was something to be endured rather than loved. But this morning, something inside him had finally snapped. "For the love of God, woman, do you ever stop talking?" Thomas's voice was cold, measured, which somehow felt worse than if he had yelled. He stood from the table, his chair scraping against the wooden floor with a sound that made her flinch. "I cannot take another moment of your endless chatter, not one more word about clouds or horses or what color the curtains should be, or what Mrs. Henderson said at church, or any of the thousand meaningless things that pour out of your mouth from sunrise to sunset." Priscilla felt the words land like physical blows. Her hands, still covered in flour, trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. She was 24 years old, had been married to Thomas for 6 years, and had spent every single one of those days trying to be a good wife. She cooked his meals, kept their house spotless, mended his clothes, and yes, she talked. She talked because silence felt like death, because words were how she made sense of the world, because sharing her thoughts with the person she loved had always seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "Thomas, I am sorry. I did not realize that I was bothering you so much," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will try to be more quiet." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that broke her heart. It was not anger or even irritation. It was exhaustion. He was tired of her, tired of everything about her, and they both knew it. "It is not just the talking, Priscilla," he said, and at least he had the decency to sound somewhat regretful. "I married you when I was 22 and you were 18, and I thought I knew what I wanted, but we are different people. You need someone who can listen to all those words, who wants to hear every thought that crosses your mind. I cannot be that person. I have tried, God knows I have tried, but I just cannot." The divorce was quick by the standards of the day, though it took 3 months to finalize, and came with a scandal that made Priscilla's mother take to her bed for a week. In 1883, Texas divorced women were viewed with suspicion and pity in equal measure, and Priscilla felt the weight of every disapproving glance as she walked through Jefferson's dusty streets. Thomas moved to Houston for work, leaving her the house they had shared, which felt more like a cruel joke than a kindness. Every room held memories of her failure, of all the times she had talked and talked and talked, while her husband had slowly stopped listening. She tried to make a life for herself. She took in sewing and mending, and some of the kinder church ladies brought her work even though their husbands disapproved. She tended a small garden behind the house, growing vegetables that she could sell or trade. But mostly she learned to be quiet. She learned to keep her observations about the clouds and the birds and the way the light fell through the trees to herself. She learned that her voice was something to be rationed, to be carefully controlled, because apparently it was too much for the world to handle. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, on a cold February morning in 1884, Priscilla was at the general store buying thread when she heard raised voices outside. She stepped onto the wooden boardwalk and saw a crowd gathering near the livery stable. A man was trying to calm a massive chestnut stallion that was rearing and bucking, its eyes rolling white with fear or rage or both. The horse had already kicked over a water trough and come dangerously close to trampling a young boy who had been foolish enough to get too near. "That animal is wild," someone in the crowd said. "Needs to be shot before it kills someone." "Sam paid good money for that horse," another voice argued. "Brought it all the way from a ranch outside Dallas. Said it had good bloodlines." "Good bloodlines or not, it is going to break someone's neck." Priscilla watched as several men tried to approach the horse, only to be driven back by its flashing hooves. The animal was terrified, she realized. Something had spooked it badly, and now every person who approached was just confirming its worst fears. She found herself moving forward before she had consciously decided to do so, her feet carrying her past the crowd and into the wide circle that had formed around the panicked horse. "Madam, you best step back," a man's voice called out, but she ignored it. She began to talk. Not loudly, not with any particular urgency, but in the same steady stream of consciousness that Thomas had found so unbearable. She talked about the morning, about the cold snap that had come through the night before, about how frightening it must be to be in a strange place surrounded by strange people. She talked about the color of the horse's coat, how it reminded her of the chestnuts that grew on her grandmother's property back in Mississippi, where she had spent her childhood summers. She talked about the smell of the hay in the stable, and how it must smell like home to a creature who had spent its life around such things. The horse's ears, which had been pinned flat against its skull, began to swivel toward her. She took a small step closer, still talking, her voice never rising or falling dramatically, but maintaining that same calm, constant rhythm. She talked about nothing and everything, letting the words flow like water, creating a sound that was soothing in its very ordinariness. "You are a beautiful creature, you know that? I can see it in the way you hold yourself, even when you are frightened. You have pride, and that is a good thing. That is something worth having. I have a little pride too, though mine has taken something of a beating lately, but I suppose that is neither here nor there as far as you are concerned. What matters to you right now is that you are scared and you do not know who to trust, and everything feels too loud and too close and too much." She was close enough now to reach out and touch the horse's neck, but she did not. She just kept talking, her hands visible at her sides, her posture relaxed. She talked about the weather, about the garden she was planning to plant in a few months when the last frost had passed, about a book she had been reading by lamplight the previous evening. The horse had stopped rearing. Its sides were still heaving, its nostrils flared, but it was listening. "The thing about being frightened," she continued, "is that it makes the whole world feel like an enemy. Every shadow is a threat, every sound is danger, and you forget that there are good things too. There are quiet mornings and cool water and fields to run in. There are people who might be kind if you give them the chance, though I will grant you that it is hard to tell which ones those are at first glance." A hand suddenly appeared in her peripheral vision, holding a rope with slow, careful movements. She glanced to the side and saw a man she did not recognize. A tall figure in dusty traveling clothes, with a worn hat pulled low over his eyes. He was not looking at her, but at the horse, and he had approached so quietly that even Priscilla had not heard him. "Keep talking," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that somehow did not startle the horse. "You are doing something remarkable here." So she kept talking, and the stranger moved with a patience that bordered on supernatural. It took another 10 minutes, but eventually the rope was around the horse's neck, and the animal, while still nervous, was no longer trying to kill anyone. The stranger led it toward the stable with movements so smooth and practiced that it was clear he had done this 1,000 times before. Priscilla followed, unable to stop herself, still talking because it seemed wrong to stop now. She talked about the inside of the stable, about the other horses there who seemed calm and well fed, about how this could be a safe place if the chestnut would let it be. The stranger got the horse into a stall and closed the gate, and only then did Priscilla finally fall silent. "That was the bravest or most foolish thing I have seen in a long time," the stranger said, turning to look at her properly for the first time. "I have not yet decided which." In the dim light of the stable, Priscilla could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 or 31, with dark hair that needed a cut and eyes that were startlingly blue. His face was tanned and weathered from time spent outdoors, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He was looking at her with something like curiosity, his head tilted slightly to one side. "I am not certain either," Priscilla admitted. "I just saw that the horse was frightened, and I thought perhaps, if someone talked to it calmly, it might settle down." "You thought correctly," he said, "though most people's idea of calm does not involve delivering what sounded like half of your life story to an animal." Priscilla felt her cheeks flush. "I apologize. I have a tendency to talk too much. My husband, my former husband, I mean, he used to say that I could talk the ears off a cornstalk if given half the chance." Something shifted in the stranger's expression, something she could not quite read. "Your former husband sounds like a fool," he said bluntly. "I am Carter Ingram, by the way. I just arrived in Jefferson this morning, looking for work as a horse trainer. I am originally from Kentucky, but have spent the last few years moving around Texas, working on various ranches." "Priscilla Ashford," she replied, offering her hand before remembering that ladies were not supposed to shake hands like men. But Carter took her hand anyway. his grip firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of working with horses and rope. "Well, Mrs. Ashford, I think you might have just helped me secure employment. The man who owns that horse is Sam Cooper, and he has been looking for someone who can work with difficult animals. If I can get that stallion trained and rideable, I suspect he will be willing to hire me on permanent." "It is Miss Ashford, actually," Priscilla corrected quietly. "I am divorced." She waited for the judgment, for the subtle pulling back that usually came when people learned about her status. But Carter just nodded, as if she had told him something as unremarkable as the time of day. "Then perhaps, Miss Ashford, you would be willing to help me with this horse? I am good at training, but I have never seen an animal respond to someone's voice the way that stallion responded to yours. I would be willing to split whatever payment I receive with you, if you are interested." Priscilla stared at him. "You want to pay me to talk to a horse?" "I want to pay you to help train a horse," Carter corrected. "Your talking is part of that, but so is your understanding of what the animal needs. Not everyone has that gift." She should have said no. She should have returned to her quiet, small life, where she kept her words to herself, and did not give people reasons to gossip more than they already did. But something in Carter's straightforward manner, in the way he had called her former husband a fool without knowing anything about the situation, made her want to take the risk. "I will help," she said, "though I cannot promise my talking will work every time." "Nothing works every time," Carter replied. "But I have a feeling about this." They spent the next 3 hours with the horse, which they learned was named Thunder, a name that seemed both dramatic and appropriate given the animal's temperament. Carter worked with a patience that amazed Priscilla, never forcing the horse to do anything, always giving it choices and time to make decisions. And Priscilla talked, her voice creating a constant backdrop of sound that seemed to soothe Thunder in ways that nothing else did. She talked about her childhood in Mississippi, about learning to ride on an old mare named Daisy, who had been gentle and kind. She talked about moving to Texas when she was 16, about the way the landscape was different here, drier and more open, but beautiful in its own way. She talked about Jefferson, about the people she knew, and the rhythm of life in a town that was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. And Carter listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel like her words had weight and value. When they finally left the stable, the sun was high in the sky, and Priscilla realized she had missed lunch entirely. Carter seemed to realize the same thing because he suggested they get something to eat at the boarding house where he was staying. Priscilla hesitated, knowing that being seen having a meal with a man would set tongues wagging, but she was hungry and tired and still riding the strange high of having done something brave. The boarding house served a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread, and they sat at a small table in the corner of the dining room. Carter ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent many meals eating quickly so he could get back to work, but he also kept glancing up at Priscilla, as if checking to make sure she was real. "May I ask you something?" he said finally, setting down his spoon. "Why did your husband object to your talking? I have been listening to you for hours now, and I cannot say I found it bothersome in the least." Priscilla looked down at her own bowl, watching the way the chunks of beef floated in the brown gravy. "I suppose he found it exhausting. I do not always know when to stop, you see. I will start talking about one thing, and then something else will remind me of another thing, and before I know it, I have been going on and on without taking a breath. Thomas said it was like living with someone who could not stand silence, and I suppose he was right about that. Silence makes me uncomfortable." "Why does silence make you uncomfortable?" Carter asked, and the question was so direct and so genuinely curious that Priscilla found herself answering honestly. "Because when things are silent, I start to hear all the thoughts in my head that I would rather not hear. I start to worry and doubt and question everything. But when I am talking, when I am putting thoughts into words and sending them out into the world, it feels like I am building something instead of just drowning in my own mind." Carter nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense to him. "I think I understand that. I am not much of a talker myself, never have been. But I have always liked listening to people who are, especially people who see the world in interesting ways. My mother was like you, always talking, always pointing out things that the rest of us would have missed. My father used to say she could find poetry in a mud puddle, and he meant it as a compliment." "Your father sounds like a good man," Priscilla said softly. "He was," Carter agreed. "He died when I was 19, got kicked by a horse that spooked. My mother passed 2 years later from pneumonia. I have been on my own since then, mostly. I have some cousins back in Kentucky, but we are not close. They talked through the rest of the meal, and then Carter walked her back to her house on the edge of town. It was a small place, just 3 rooms, but Priscilla had tried to make it cheerful with curtains she had sewn herself and flowers in the window boxes. Carter looked at it with an appraising eye and then smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. "It suits you," he said. "It looks like a place where someone thinks about things like curtains and flowers." "Thank you," Priscilla said, unsure if that was truly a compliment, but choosing to take it as one. "Will you come by tomorrow to work with Thunder again?" "I will," Carter promised. "If you are still willing to help, I would like to make this a regular arrangement, at least until Thunder is trained." "I am willing," Priscilla said, and she realized as she said it that she meant it with her whole heart. For the next month, Priscilla spent her mornings with Carter and Thunder in the stable. The work was hard and sometimes frightening, but the horse was slowly becoming calmer, more trusting. Carter had a gift for reading animals, for knowing when to push and when to give space, and Priscilla found herself learning from him, even as she helped with her constant stream of talk. But more than the work with the horse, Priscilla found herself looking forward to the time with Carter himself. He was unlike any man she had ever known. Where Thomas had been conventional and concerned with appearances, Carter seemed completely indifferent to what other people thought. He wore clothes that were practical rather than fashionable, spoke his mind without prettying up his words, and treated Priscilla like an equal partner in the work they were doing, and he listened to her. He truly, genuinely listened. When she talked about the shapes of clouds or the way the morning light hit the stable walls, or the story she had read the night before, Carter listened with his full attention. Sometimes he asked questions that showed he had been paying attention to every word. Sometimes he just nodded and smiled, letting her know that her words were welcome. Never once did he tell her to be quiet or suggest that she was talking too much. One morning in late March, as they were taking a break from working with Thunder, Carter leaned against the stable wall and looked at Priscilla with an expression she could not quite read. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course," Priscilla replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I could listen to you forever and not get tired," Carter said, and his voice was so sincere that it made Priscilla's breath catch. "I know your former husband made you feel like your talking was a burden, but I want you to know that I feel exactly the opposite. The sound of your voice is one of the best parts of my day. It makes everything feel less lonely." Priscilla felt tears prick at her eyes, which was ridiculous because she was a grown woman standing in a stable, not a young girl receiving her first compliment. But no one had ever said anything like that to her before. Thomas had tolerated her talking when they were courting, had even seemed charmed by it at first, but he had never acted like it was something valuable, something worth cherishing. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me," she managed to say, her voice shaking slightly. Carter pushed off from the wall and took a step toward her. "I am not saying it to be kind, Priscilla. I am saying it because it is true. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you something for weeks now, and I suppose there is no graceful way to do it, so I am just going to say it plain. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen in love with you. I know the timing might seem wrong, what with your divorce being so recent. And I know people in town will talk, but I cannot keep pretending that I think of you as just a friend or a work partner." Priscilla felt like the world had tilted slightly on its axis. She looked at Carter, at his earnest face and his steady blue eyes, and realized that she had been falling in love with him too. It had happened so gradually that she had not noticed it, like the way winter slowly gives way to spring, but it was undeniably there, this feeling of rightness when she was near him, this sense that she could be fully herself without apology or shame. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she said quietly. "But Carter, I am frightened. I failed at marriage once already. What if I fail again? What if you eventually grow tired of me the way Thomas did?" Carter closed the remaining distance between them and took both of her hands in his. "I cannot promise you that everything will be perfect because life does not work that way. But I can promise you that I will never ask you to be someone you are not. I will never make you feel like you need to be quiet or small or less than you are. Your words, your thoughts, your way of seeing the world, those are all part of who you are, and I love who you are." Priscilla looked up at him, and something inside her that had been tightly closed since her divorce began to open. "I need time," she said, "not because I doubt my feelings, but because I need to be sure that I am choosing this for the right reasons. I need to know that I am not just looking for someone to save me from loneliness or scandal. Take all the time you need, Carter said. I am not going anywhere. But time, as it turned out, was not going to be quite so cooperative. 2 weeks after Carter's confession, a man rode into Jefferson looking for him. The man was a ranch foreman from a large property outside Dallas, and he had heard about Carter's reputation with difficult horses. He offered Carter a job that would pay 3 times what he was currently making, working with a string of horses that had been bought at auction and needed training. Carter listened to the offer and then asked for a day to think about it. That evening, he came to Priscilla's house and sat at her small kitchen table while she made coffee. I need to tell you about the job offer, he said, and he explained the situation in his usual straightforward manner. The money would be substantial, enough that I could save up and eventually buy some land of my own, start my own horse training operation. But the ranch is outside Dallas, which means I would have to leave Jefferson. Priscilla's hand stilled on the coffee pot. When would you have to leave? Within the week, Carter said. The foreman wants someone who can start right away. Then you should take it, Priscilla said, forcing her voice to stay steady. It sounds like an excellent opportunity. It is an excellent opportunity, Carter agreed, but it would mean leaving you, and that is not something I want to do, unless you would consider coming with me. Priscilla set down the coffee pot with a soft thunk. Carter, we have only been courting for 2 weeks, and even that is a generous description of what we have been doing. I cannot just leave Jefferson and follow you to Dallas. Why not? Carter asked, and his voice was gentle but also challenging. I know it would be unconventional, but we could get married before we leave. I know it is fast, maybe too fast. But, Priscilla, I am 31 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I do not want to spend months or years courting you from a distance when I already know what I want. What if I am not ready to get married again? Priscilla asked, and her voice sounded small even to her own ears. What if I need more time to be sure? Carter stood up and came around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his again. Then I will turn down the job and stay here. I will court you for as long as you need to be sure. The opportunity is meaningless to me if it means losing you. Priscilla looked at their joined hands, at the way Carter's rough, calloused fingers intertwined with her own. She thought about the past 6 months of her life, about learning to be quiet, about trying to make herself smaller and less troublesome. And then she thought about the past month with Carter, about feeling like she could breathe fully for the first time since her marriage had fallen apart. Ask me again, she said suddenly, looking up to meet Carter's eyes. Ask you what? Carter said, though she could see in his face that he knew. Ask me to marry you and come to Dallas with you. Ask me properly. Carter's face broke into a wide smile. Priscilla Ashford, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a horse trainer who does not have much to offer except his whole heart and a promise to listen to every word you say for the rest of our lives? Yes, Priscilla said, and the word came out as half laugh, half sob. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 days later by the Methodist minister, with Sam Cooper and his wife standing as witnesses. Priscilla wore a simple blue dress that she had owned for years, and Carter wore his best shirt and a string tie. The ceremony was brief, just the essential words and promises, but when Carter kissed her at the end of it, Priscilla felt like she was standing at the beginning of a great adventure rather than the end of a small, scared chapter of her life. Leaving Jefferson was harder than she had expected. Despite the scandal of her divorce, it had been her home for 8 years. She said goodbye to the few friends who had stood by her, packed up the belongings that mattered, and sold or gave away everything else. Her house was rented to a young couple who were new to town, and Priscilla tried not to feel melancholy about seeing another woman hanging curtains in her kitchen. The journey to Dallas took 3 days by wagon, and Priscilla talked for most of it. She talked about the landscape, about the small towns they passed through, about her hopes and fears for their new life. Carter drove the wagon and listened, occasionally adding his own observations, but mostly just letting her words wash over him like music. The ranch outside Dallas was larger than Priscilla had imagined, with hundreds of acres of grazing land and a main house that looked like something from a painting. Carter's quarters were not in the main house, but in a small cottage that had been built for the previous horse trainer. It was just 2 rooms, a main living space with a kitchen area and a bedroom, but it had glass windows and a real wood floor, and Priscilla immediately began planning how she would arrange their few possessions to make it feel like home. The work was demanding. Carter was expected to train at least a dozen horses over the next few months, and several of them had temperaments that made Thunder look docile by comparison. Priscilla helped whenever she could, talking to the frightened animals, creating that same soothing stream of sound that seemed to calm them. But she also knew that Carter needed to establish himself as capable and professional, so she tried not to be underfoot. She found other ways to occupy her time. She took in mending from some of the other ranch families, helped the cook at the main house prepare meals when they were short-handed, and planted a small garden next to their cottage. The ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, was a kind woman in her 50s who seemed amused rather than scandalized by Priscilla's divorce and quick remarriage. "Life is too short to worry about what other people think," Eleanor told Priscilla one afternoon as they shelled peas on the main house's back porch. "I married Mr. Harrison 3 months after meeting him, and people said we would never last. That was 32 years ago. When you know, you know." As spring turned into summer, Priscilla and Carter fell into a rhythm. They woke early, worked hard during the day, and spent their evenings together in the cottage, talking about everything and nothing. Carter told her stories about his childhood in Kentucky, about his parents and the small farm, where he had learned to work with horses. Priscilla told him about her family in Mississippi, about the brother she had lost to fever when she was 10, about the way her mother had cried for a year afterward. They talked about their marriage, too, about the ways it was different from what each of them had expected. Carter admitted that sometimes he felt inadequate, like he should be able to offer Priscilla more than a 2-room cottage and a life that revolved around horses. Priscilla told him that she had never felt more valued or seen than she did with him, that the cottage felt like more of a home than the house in Jefferson ever had. "Do you ever miss it?" Carter asked one night as they lay in bed, the summer heat making it too warm for more than a thin sheet. "Your old life, I mean. The house, the town, being married to someone more conventional than me." "No," Priscilla said honestly. "I miss some of the people, and I miss the familiarity of a place I had lived for years. But I do not miss who I was trying to be there. I do not miss keeping quiet or feeling like I was too much. With you, I can just be myself." Carter pulled her closer, his arm around her waist. "Good. Because you are exactly who I want you to be." In July, Priscilla realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a week or two, but had not been sure until the morning sickness started and would not stop. She was simultaneously thrilled and terrified. She and Thomas had never had children, and she had sometimes wondered if perhaps she could not. But apparently that had not been the issue. She told Carter on a Sunday afternoon, when they had rare time off and were sitting by the small creek that ran through the ranch property. She had planned a whole speech about how she knew the timing was not ideal, and their cottage was small and money was tight. But when it came down to it, she just blurted it out. "I am pregnant." Carter, who had been skipping stones across the water, turned to look at her with an expression of pure astonishment. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it, yes." Carter dropped the stone he had been holding and closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing in a way she had never heard from him before, pure and joyful, and completely unself-conscious. "We are going to have a baby," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Priscilla, we are going to have a baby. You are happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am more than happy," Carter said. "I am overwhelmed and slightly terrified and more excited than I have ever been about anything. How are you feeling? Are you well? Should you be sitting down?" Priscilla laughed at his sudden concern. "I am feeling fine, mostly. Some sickness in the mornings, but the doctor in town said that is normal. The baby should come sometime in February if my calculations are correct." They told the Harrisons that evening, and Eleanor immediately insisted on giving them a bigger cottage, one that had 3 rooms instead of 2. "You cannot raise a baby in that tiny space," she declared. "The Johnsons moved back east last month, and their cottage has been sitting empty. It is yours if you want it." The cottage Eleanor offered was indeed larger, with a separate bedroom, a small nursery, and a living space that felt positively spacious compared to what they were used to. They moved in during August, and Priscilla spent the following months preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes, receiving blankets that she embroidered with careful stitches, and a quilt that took her 6 weeks to complete. Eleanor and some of the other ranch women gave her advice, some of it helpful and some of it contradictory. but all of it offered with genuine kindness. Carter became almost comically protective as Priscilla's belly grew. He did not want her working with the horses anymore, worried that she might get hurt. He insisted she rest more, eat more, take things easy in ways that sometimes made her laugh and sometimes made her want to snap at him. But she could see the love and fear beneath his protectiveness, the awareness that childbirth was dangerous and could go wrong in 100 different ways. "I am going to be fine," she told him one evening in December, when she was 7 months along and feeling roughly the size of a barn. "Women have babies every day. I am healthy and strong, and we have a good doctor in town." "I know," Carter said, but his hand on her belly was gentle, almost reverent. "I know, but I could not bear it if anything happened to you. You are everything to me, Priscilla." "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said firmly. "I am going to have this baby, and then we are going to raise him or her together, and everything is going to be wonderful." She was right, mostly. Their son was born on a cold February night in 1885, after 14 hours of labor that left Priscilla exhausted but euphoric. They named him James Thomas Ingram, Thomas being Carter's father's name, though Priscilla could not help but think of her first husband when she heard it. But this Thomas, this tiny being with Carter's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, was something entirely new and separate from her past. Carter held his son for the first time, with hands that trembled slightly, and Priscilla watched as tears rolled down her husband's face without him seeming to notice or care. "He is perfect," Carter whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." The first months of motherhood were harder than Priscilla had anticipated. James was a fussy baby who did not sleep well and cried often, and there were nights when Priscilla felt like she might lose her mind from exhaustion. But Carter was there through all of it, walking the floor with James when Priscilla needed to sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and listening to Priscilla talk through her fears and frustrations. "I thought I would know how to do this instinctively," Priscilla said one night, close to tears because James would not stop crying, and she could not figure out what was wrong. "I thought mothers just knew what their babies needed, but I feel like I am just guessing all the time." "Then we will guess together," Carter said, taking James from her arms and trying the same rocking motion that had not worked when Priscilla did it. "There is no instruction manual for this, Priscilla. We are both learning as we go." As James grew, becoming less of a fussy infant and more of a curious, alert baby, Priscilla found herself settling into motherhood. She talked to James constantly, narrating their days together, telling him stories about his father and grandparents, describing the world around them in the same detailed way she described everything. Carter would sometimes come home from working with the horses to find Priscilla and James in the garden, Priscilla talking away while James gurgled and cooed from his basket. "I worry sometimes that I am talking at him too much," Priscilla admitted to Carter one evening, "that I am doing to him what Thomas said I did to him." "You are not talking at him, you are talking to him," Carter corrected. "There is a difference, and besides, I have read that babies learn language from hearing it constantly. You are probably giving our son a considerable advantage." When James was 6 months old, Mr. Harrison approached Carter with an offer. He was getting older, and his own children had no interest in ranching. He wanted to sell off a parcel of land on the eastern edge of the property, about 50 acres, to someone who would use it well. He offered to sell it to Carter at a price that was more than fair, with terms that would allow him to pay it off over time. "It would be enough land for us to build a proper house," Carter told Priscilla that night, his excitement barely contained. "We could have our own horse training operation, work for ourselves instead of for someone else. I know it would be hard at first, the money would be tight, but I think we could do it." "Then we should do it," Priscilla said without hesitation. "I trust you, Carter. If you think we can make it work, then I believe you." The next 2 years were a blur of hard work and careful planning. Carter continued working for the Harrisons while slowly building up his own reputation and client base. Priscilla helped with the business side of things, keeping records of clients and payments, writing correspondence, and sometimes helping train horses when her schedule allowed. They saved every penny they could, living frugally but not miserably, always keeping their goal in mind. In the spring of 1887, they broke ground on their house. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a front porch, but it was theirs. Carter did much of the work himself, with help from some of the other ranch hands, and Priscilla could see their future taking shape in the frame and walls and roof. They moved into the house that August, when James was 2.5, and talking in full sentences that often surprised adults with their complexity. Priscilla suspected he got his verbal abilities from her, and she was determined to make sure he never felt like talking was something to be ashamed of. Their horse training business grew slowly but steadily. Word spread that Carter Ingram could work magic with difficult horses, and that his wife had a way of calming even the most skittish animals. People came from all over the Dallas area, sometimes from even farther away, bringing horses that others had given up on. Carter and Priscilla worked together on most of them, a team that complemented each other perfectly. In 1889, Priscilla gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose. Unlike her brother, Catherine was a calm, easy baby who slept through the night almost from the beginning. She had Priscilla's lighter coloring and what promised to be her mother's talent for constant observation and commentary on the world. "We are going to have two talkers," Carter said one evening, watching as 3-year-old James explained to his baby sister in great detail how clouds were formed. "Our house is going to be very loud." "Is that a problem?" Priscilla asked, half joking but also slightly worried. "It is music," Carter said, pulling her close. "It is the sound of our family, and I would not change a single note of it." The years passed, bringing their share of joys and challenges. There was the drought of 1892 that made money tight and forced them to be creative about keeping their horses fed and watered. There was the injury in 1894 when a young stallion kicked Carter in the ribs, cracking 2 of them and leaving him unable to work for 6 weeks. There was the scarlet fever that swept through the area in 1896, sparing their family but taking several children from neighboring properties. But there were far more good times than bad. There were birthdays and holidays, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset, mornings spent working with horses side by side. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and mathematics, and Catherine became a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who asked approximately 1,000 questions a day. In 1898, when Priscilla was 39 and Carter 45, they welcomed a surprise third child, a son they named Daniel Carter. Daniel was the perfect blend of his parents, with Carter's steady temperament and Priscilla's expressive nature. His arrival felt like a gift, a reminder that life could still surprise them in wonderful ways. One evening in the spring of 1901, Priscilla and Carter sat on their porch watching James, now 16, work with a young horse in the corral. Catherine, 12, was reading aloud to 8-year-old Daniel, her voice carrying across the yard in a steady stream of words that made Priscilla smile. The business was thriving, their children were healthy, and Priscilla felt a contentment that she had never imagined possible back in that kitchen in Jefferson when Thomas had thrown his coffee cup against the wall. "Do you ever think about him?" Carter asked suddenly, and Priscilla knew without asking that he meant Thomas. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed married to him?" Priscilla considered the question seriously, as she always tried to do with Carter's questions. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because I wish things had turned out differently, but more out of curiosity. I wonder if he ever found someone who suited him better, someone quieter. I hope he did. I hope he is happy." "That is generous of you," Carter said. "It is not really generosity," Priscilla replied. "It is just recognition that we were not right for each other, and that is not really anyone's fault. He was not a bad person, just a person who needed something different than what I could give him. And if we had not divorced, I would never have met you, and I cannot imagine a world where that did not happen." Carter reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past 17 years. "I used to worry, back when we first got married, that maybe you were just choosing me because I was safe, because I did not criticize your talking. I worried that you did not really love me, just what I represented. And now?" Priscilla asked. "Now I know better," Carter said. "I see the way you look at me when you think I am not paying attention. I hear it in your voice when you say my name. I feel it in the life we have built together. You chose me, Priscilla, and you keep choosing me every day. That is worth more than any declaration of love." Priscilla leaned her head on Carter's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of this man who had kept his promise to listen to her forever without getting tired. "I do love you," she said. "I love you more now than I did when we got married, which I would not have thought possible at the time." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, which was something Priscilla had learned to appreciate over the years. Carter had taught her that not every silence needed to be filled, that sometimes quiet was just another way of being together. But he had also taught her that her words had value, that her way of seeing and describing the world was a gift rather than a burden. "Mama," Catherine called from across the yard, "Daniel wants to know if the stars are actually on fire or if they just look like they are on fire. I told him I thought they were on fire, but he says that does not make sense because fire needs air, and there is no air in space. Who is right?" Priscilla smiled, standing up from her chair. "I suppose I should go explain astronomy to our children." "You should," Carter agreed. "Take your time. Use as many words as you need." As Priscilla walked across the yard toward her children, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had not been easy or straightforward. There had been pain and failure, and moments when she had doubted herself completely. But all of those experiences had led her here, to this ranch outside Dallas, to this family that loved her exactly as she was. She began to talk, explaining to Catherine and Daniel about stars and space and the way light traveled across vast distances. James joined them, adding his own knowledge from the books he had read, and soon all three children were asking questions and offering theories. Priscilla answered each question, encouraged each theory, and felt the pure joy of being fully herself in a space where that was not just accepted, but celebrated. Carter watched from the porch, his heart full as he listened to his wife's voice carrying across the evening air. He thought about that first day in Jefferson when he had seen a woman talking to a frightened horse with more patience and understanding than most people ever showed to other humans. He had known then, though he had not admitted it to himself for weeks afterward, that she was someone special. Over the years that followed, their life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. James left home at 18 to attend university in Houston, where he studied engineering and eventually met a young woman named Sarah, who was as quiet as he was thoughtful. They married in 1905, and Priscilla cried happy tears at the wedding, watching her firstborn start his own life. Catherine showed no interest in following her brother to college, but instead wanted to work with horses like her parents. She had inherited both Carter's gift for reading animals and Priscilla's ability to soothe them with words. By the time she was 20, she was training horses on her own, and clients specifically requested her for their most difficult animals. Daniel, the surprise baby who had come along when Priscilla thought she was done having children, grew into a young man with a gift for business. He took over managing the financial side of the horse training operation when he was just 16, and under his guidance, their modest ranch grew into one of the most respected horse training facilities in all of Texas. In 1910, Priscilla and Carter celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. They were both older now, with silver threading through their hair and lines around their eyes that told the story of years spent outdoors. But when Carter looked at Priscilla, he still saw the woman who had walked into a corral with a frightened horse and talked it calm, with nothing but her voice and her courage. "Have I ever told you about the day I realized I was going to marry you?" Carter asked, as they sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You have told me about when you decided to ask me," Priscilla replied, "but not when you realized you were going to marry me. Is there a difference?" "There is," Carter said. "I decided to ask you when the job offer came from Dallas, and I could not stand the thought of leaving you behind. But I realized I was going to marry you weeks before that, on an ordinary Tuesday morning when we were working with Thunder. You were talking about something, I cannot even remember what, maybe about the weather or a book you were reading, and I thought to myself, I want to listen to this voice for the rest of my life. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I am going to hear whatever thoughts are in this woman's mind." It was not a dramatic moment, just a quiet certainty. Priscilla felt tears prick at her eyes, which was ridiculous because she was a 51-year-old woman who had heard her husband say he loved her approximately 10,000 times. But something about this story, about the ordinariness of the moment when Carter had realized he wanted forever with her, touched her deeply. "Do you know when I realized I was going to marry you?" she asked. "Tell me," Carter said. "It was when you offered to turn down the Dallas job. If I was not ready to get married, you were willing to give up a significant opportunity, a chance to build the life you wanted, just to give me more time to be certain. That was when I knew that you truly saw me, that you were not just charmed by me or attracted to me, but that you understood who I was and were willing to work with that reality." They sat together as the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear Catherine moving around in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Daniel was in town visiting friends. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional sound of horses settling in for the night. "Do you think they will be all right?" Priscilla asked suddenly. "Our children, I mean. Do you think we have prepared them for the world?" "I think they will be more than all right," Carter said. "James is building bridges in Houston. Catherine is running her own training operation. Daniel is turning our small ranch into something significant. We raised them to be thoughtful, capable, kind people, and they are all of those things. They will have their struggles, as everyone does, but they have the tools to handle them." "I hope so," Priscilla said. "I hope we did well by them." "We did," Carter assured her. "Look at what they are becoming. Look at the choices they are making. They are good people, Priscilla, and that is because of how we raised them together." In 1915, James and Sarah welcomed their first child, making Priscilla and Carter grandparents for the first time. The baby was a boy named Thomas Carter, and when Priscilla held him for the first time, she felt the strange circularity of time. She had once been married to a different Thomas, in a different life, and now here was this new Thomas, her grandson, representing the future in a way that felt both poignant and hopeful. Catherine married in 1916 to a rancher named Michael Stevens, who had brought a horse to her for training and fallen in love with both the horse whisperer and the woman. Their wedding was held at the ranch, with horses adorned with flowers, and the ceremony performed under an oak tree that Carter and Priscilla had planted when they first bought the land. Daniel, always the most independent of their children, announced in 1918 that he was moving to Fort Worth to start his own business venture, something involving livestock auctions and breeding programs that Priscilla did not fully understand, but that Daniel explained with the same passionate detail that Priscilla used when she talked about things that interested her. "He gets that from you," Carter said with amusement after Daniel had spent an hour explaining his business plan over dinner. "That ability to talk about something with such enthusiasm that you make other people interested, even if they had no previous interest in the subject." As the years continued to pass, Priscilla and Carter slowly stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Catherine took over most of the horse training, with Daniel managing the business from Fort Worth through regular visits and detailed correspondence. Priscilla and Carter found themselves with more time to simply be together, to take long walks around the property, to sit on the porch and watch the world go by. They talked, as they always had, about everything and nothing. They talked about the past, about those early days in Jefferson and the leap of faith they had taken together. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the world that was changing so rapidly around them with new technologies and new ways of thinking. They talked about the future, about what would come next, though neither of them liked to dwell too much on the reality that they were both growing older and that time was finite. In 1922, when Priscilla was 63 and Carter 70, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. By this time, they had 5 grandchildren, with 2 more on the way, and the ranch had grown into a significant operation that employed a dozen people and trained horses for clients across Texas and beyond. "We built something good," Carter said on the morning of their anniversary, looking out over the land they had worked for so many years. "Something that will last beyond us." "We did," Priscilla agreed. "But more than the ranch, more than the business, we built a life together that has been everything I never knew I needed. You saved me, Carter, though I know you hate when I say that." "I do hate when you say that," Carter confirmed. "Because I did not save you, Priscilla. You saved yourself. You were brave enough to leave a marriage that was not working. You were brave enough to help with that frightened horse, even though you could have been hurt. You were brave enough to take a chance on me, to marry me, and move to a place where you knew no one, to build this life from nothing. All I did was see who you already were and appreciate it. Then perhaps we saved each other," Priscilla suggested. "I was lost before I met you, and I think perhaps you were lonely in ways you did not admit even to yourself. We found each other at the right moment, and we had the wisdom to recognize what we had found." Carter pulled her close, and they stood together looking out over the ranch that had been their shared dream and shared work for so many years. The morning sun was warm on their faces, and in the distance they could see Catherine working with a young horse, her voice carrying faintly on the breeze as she talked it through, whatever fear or resistance it was feeling. "She sounds like you," Carter observed. "That same steady stream of words, that same patience." "She learned from the best," Priscilla said with a smile. from both of us. As they grew even older, their bodies beginning to betray them with the various aches and limitations of age, Priscilla and Carter adapted their life to match their capabilities. They no longer worked with horses directly, but they still walked through the stables every morning, greeting each animal by name, checking on their well-being. They spent their afternoons on the porch, where Priscilla would often read aloud from newspapers or books, while Carter listened with the same attention he had always given her words. In 1928, Carter fell ill with a respiratory infection that seemed minor at first, but grew worse despite the doctor's best efforts. He spent 3 weeks in bed, with Priscilla at his side constantly, talking to him through the worst of the fever, telling him stories about their life together, about their children and grandchildren, about all the good things they had built. Carter recovered, but he was weaker after that. His energy diminished in ways that frustrated him. "I am 76 years old," he said one morning, when he could not manage the walk out to the stables that he had made every morning for decades. "I suppose I should not be surprised that my body is starting to give out." "Your body is not giving out," Priscilla said firmly. "It is just tired. You have worked hard your entire life. You are allowed to rest." "I do not want to rest," Carter said, and his voice held frustration and something else, something that might have been fear. "I do not want to stop, Priscilla. There is still so much I want to do, so much time I want to spend with you." "Then we will spend time together right here," Priscilla said. "We do not need to be working in the stables or training horses to be together. We can sit on this porch and talk, or sit in comfortable silence, and that is enough. You are enough, Carter, exactly as you are right now." They developed a new routine, one that accommodated Carter's limitations while still giving structure to their days. They woke early, as they always had, and Priscilla would make breakfast while Carter sat at the kitchen table and told her about his dreams from the night before. They would spend the morning on the porch, watching the activity of the ranch, occasionally receiving visits from Catherine or one of the hands who wanted Carter's advice on a particular horse. Afternoons were for resting, and evenings were for family dinners when anyone was available, or quiet meals together when it was just the two of them. Priscilla found herself talking even more than usual, as if trying to fill any silence that might let in thoughts of a future she did not want to contemplate. She talked about the past, about the present, about plans for the ranch and worries about their children. Carter listened to all of it, as he always had, occasionally reaching out to take her hand or smile at a particular turn of phrase. "You know what I realized?" Carter said one evening in the spring of 1930, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "In all these years, you have never once repeated yourself. Oh, you have talked about the same topics multiple times, the same people and places and ideas. But you have never said the exact same thing twice. Every time you tell a story, there is some new detail, some new insight. It is remarkable, really." "I never thought about it that way," Priscilla admitted. "I just talk about what I am thinking, and I suppose I am always thinking something slightly different, even when I am thinking about the same subject." "It is one of the things I love most about you," Carter said. "That endlessly curious mind, that constant drive to observe and describe and understand. I meant what I said all those years ago, Priscilla. I could listen to you forever and not get tired." "You have listened to me for 46 years, Priscilla pointed out. "That is quite close to forever." "Not close enough," Carter said quietly. "I want more time. I want to listen to you for another 46 years, and then another 46 after that." But time, as it always does, kept moving at its own pace. In December of 1930, Carter passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Priscilla beside him holding his hand. He was 78 years old and had lived a good, full life, but Priscilla felt his loss like a physical wound. The man who had listened to her for 46 years, who had loved her exactly as she was, who had built a life with her that was rich and meaningful and full of love, was gone. The funeral was large, with people coming from across Texas to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his skill with horses, and his devotion to his family. Priscilla stood beside her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace, but inside she felt hollowed out and lost. In the weeks and months that followed, she struggled to find her footing. The house felt empty without Carter's presence, without his quiet listening that had been the counterpoint to her talking for so many years. She found herself falling silent for the first time in her life, not because anyone was telling her to be quiet, but because talking without Carter there to listen felt pointless. Catherine, worried about her mother, suggested that Priscilla move into the main ranch house with her and Michael and their children. But Priscilla refused. This house, with its memories of Carter, with the life they had built together embedded in every board and nail, was where she needed to be. Slowly, painfully, Priscilla began to heal. She started talking again, mostly to herself at first, narrating her days the way she had narrated them to Carter. She talked to the horses when she walked through the stables, telling them about Carter and about the ranch, and about anything else that came to mind. She talked to her grandchildren when they visited, answering their endless questions with the same patience and detail that Carter had always shown when listening to her. One morning in the spring of 1931, about 6 months after Carter's death, Priscilla woke up and realized that she could feel gratitude alongside the grief. She was grateful for the 46 years she had been given with a man who had loved her without reservation. She was grateful for their children and grandchildren, for the ranch that continued to thrive, for the life they had built together that was carrying on even without Carter's physical presence. She walked out to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together and sat in Carter's chair, looking out over the land. "I miss you," she said aloud, not caring if anyone heard her talking to someone who was no longer there. "I miss you every single day, but I am going to be all right, Carter. You made sure of that, by loving me and by teaching me that my voice had value. I am going to keep talking, keep living, keep appreciating the world the way you taught me to appreciate it. And someday, when it is my time, I will find you again, and I will tell you everything that happened after you left, every single detail, and you will listen the way you always did." Priscilla lived for another 12 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, active in the ranch operations in an advisory capacity, and known throughout the area as a woman with endless stories and boundless wisdom. She talked to anyone who would listen about horses and ranching and life, but mostly she talked about Carter, making sure that everyone knew about the man who had seen a divorced woman calming a frightened horse and had recognized something worth treasuring. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1943 at the age of 84. Her children found her in the morning, peacefully gone, her face relaxed in a way that suggested she had died happy. On her bedside table was a letter she had written to be read after her death. Catherine read the letter aloud at the funeral, her voice breaking slightly but staying strong. "My dear children," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have gone to join your father, and I could not be happier about that prospect. I have lived a long and full life, far richer than I ever imagined possible when I was a young woman, trapped in a marriage where I was told I talked too much. Your father taught me that words are not a burden, but a gift. He taught me that being fully yourself is not something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. He taught me that love is not about making yourself smaller to fit someone else's expectations, but about finding someone who celebrates your largeness, who wants you to be exactly who you are. I want you to remember this as you live your own lives, as you love your own partners and raise your own children. Do not make yourself smaller for anyone. Do not apologize for your gifts, whatever they may be. Find people who celebrate you, who see your quirks and your passions and your peculiarities as things to be treasured rather than tolerated. Your father used to say that he could listen to me forever and not get tired, and he kept that promise until the day he died. That is the kind of love worth having, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. I hope each of you finds that kind of love, or has already found it, and if you have not yet found it, do not settle for anything less. I love you all more than words can express, though I suppose I have tried to express it in approximately 10 million words over the course of your lives. Thank you for listening to your verbose mother, for letting me be exactly who I was, for carrying on the legacy that your father and I built together. Now, if you will excuse me, I have 46 years worth of stories to tell your father, and I am sure he is waiting patiently to hear every single word. All my love, always and forever, Mama. There was not a dry eye at the funeral as Catherine finished reading. They buried Priscilla next to Carter on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under an oak tree that provided shade and peace. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, and a single inscription that Catherine had chosen. They listened to each other forever and never grew tired. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive under Catherine's management and Daniel's business acumen. James's children and Catherine's children and Daniel's children all played a role in the operation at various times, keeping the family legacy alive. The story of Carter and Priscilla became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of what true love looked like. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and the sun was setting over the Texas hills, family members would swear they could hear voices on the wind. Two voices, one that talked in an endless joyful stream, and one that listened with patience and love, still together after all these years, still building their forever one word at a time.